Good evening, everyone. I'm D. Marianne Babinski. It's my pleasure to welcome you to UBC Law at Allard Hall for this very special occasion. As you undoubtedly know, this is the first celebration of the Allard Prize for International Integrity. And when we think about the importance of having an international prize for integrity based here at UBC Law, you understand the sense of joy and excitement that I have in seeing you all here today and in welcoming you to this very historic occasion. So to tell you a little bit more about the prize, it's a $100,000 prize awarded to an individual, movement, or organization that has shown exceptional courage and leadership in combating corruption, especially through promoting transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. The Allard Prize for International Integrity was conceived of and is generously funded by UBC Law alumnus Peter A. Allard, QC, who is here with us this evening and who you will hear from shortly. We are enormously proud and grateful to be involved with this international award. As some of you may be able to discern from the Latin motto behind me, which is, for the others of us who can't read it, roughly interpreted as "Let justice be done though the heavens fall," the law school has a deep and long-standing history of advancing human rights. This law school was started in the aftermath of World War II, when veterans returning to Canada from around the world were deeply conscious of what happens with governmental power run amok and the dangers and risks that governmental authority presents to individual human rights. And indeed, faculty members have been pioneers in articulating and supporting human rights for women, for indigenous communities, for prisoners, and the rights of victims of crime around the world. Faculty scholarship stands at the forefront of new thinking on corporate complicity and the violation of human rights, in fighting human trafficking, in protecting our environment, and expanding economic and social rights. Currently housed within the law school are programs which invite direct student engagement in advancing human rights, including the Social Justice Concentration, the Innocence Project, the Center for Feminist Legal Studies, and the Indigenous Legal Studies program. We recognize that everyone in our global society can make important contributions to promoting human rights, to protecting the rule of law, and to fighting corruption. The Allard Prize for International Integrity provides a unique opportunity for individuals and organizations to be recognized for this work. And through that recognition, we hope to inspire people who work so tirelessly and courageously on behalf of these issues to continue their fight, and to inspire all of us to contemplate how we can best carry out and try and meet these same goals. This prize has given us, as a law school, such a unique opportunity to take the knowledge in the law school, to take the energy and vision shared by our faculty and students, and to be a part of fighting corruption and promoting human rights around the world. As the beginning part of this evening, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the prize itself and how we came to this moment before you actually have a chance to meet our finalists. The Allard Prize, which is administered by UBC Law, is steered by an Allard Prize committee in consultation with an Allard Prize advisory board. And I'd like to take a moment to recognize people who have served on these two groups and to tell you a little bit about what they've done. The Allard Prize Committee was established in the fall of 2012, and you can take note of that date. That was just a year ago. And it includes representatives of both UBC Law at Allard Hall and members of the community who share this passionate commitment to protect human rights, to promote transparency in the rule of law, and to fight corruption. In the past year, the committee has made progress, as we can tell by being here today, in a number of key areas in establishing the prize criteria, in the nomination process, in the selection process, and finding ways to communicate about the prize across Canada, North America, and around the world. It's initiated a photo competition to recognize photographers who capture compelling images that reflect the risks of corruption, the need to fight for human rights, and promote the ideals of the prize through their photographic work. The committee also established an award design competition, inviting artists and designers to create an original work that could be given to the prize winners that would reflect the ideals and values and purposes of the prize. This is a very busy committee, as I think you can tell. And so I'm pleased to recognize today the Allard Prize committee members: Natasha Affolter, Associate Professor at UBC's Faculty of Law; Rob King, Principal at Westbridge Capital Group; Jeff Lister, Partner at Fasken Martineau; Richard Olson, Lawyer at McKechnie and Company; Benjamin Richardson, Canada Research Chair in Environmental Law and Sustainability at UBC Law; and James Stewart, Assistant Professor at UBC Law at Allard Hall, roughly placed in the second row here for people who want to look at them with amazement at all they've accomplished. The Allard Prize Advisory Board is made up of individuals who have substantial experience in and commitment to the fight against corruption and for human rights around the world. The Advisory Board exists to further the mission and aims of the Allard Prize. It acts as a sounding board for the Allard Prize Committee in meeting all of its objectives and vision. And in particular, the Allard Prize Advisory Board assisted in thinking about the selection process itself. The Allard Prize Advisory Board members are Dr. Mark Ellis, Executive Director of the International Bar Association in London, England; Mr. James Klotz, Partner at Miller Thompson LLP in Toronto; Justice Ellen Northfleet, currently Partner at Ellen Gracie Associates in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil; and Stephen Zimmerman, Director of Operations, Integrity Vice Presidency with the World Bank in Washington, D.C. We are honored that those advisory board members helped and offered their advice in so many critical phases of this project. I mentioned that a year ago the Allard Prize Committee started its work, and I'm delighted to report that in the end we received more than 100 nominations representing 48 countries across 6 continents. Amazing nominees who included prominent world leaders, academics, grassroots activists, social movements, charitable groups, and others devoted to important causes related to human rights and fighting corruption around the world. It was simply amazing to see the breadth of the nominations in this first year and to see the many ways that groups and individuals had taken up the task of fighting corruption and promoting human rights around the world. And it reinforced our belief that this is a pivotal opportunity to say to all of us that we have a role to play in this important work. After a comprehensive review of the nominations, the Allard Prize Advisory Board provided input on the nominees, and at last, the Allard Prize Committee set to work in selecting 3 global champions in the fight against corruption. The 3 finalists were selected based on carefully considered prize criteria, demonstrating courage and leadership in the fight against corruption and for transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. The distinguished finalists who are here with us this evening are Anna Hazare. Mr. Hazare is one of India's most influential and well-known social and political activists. He's led popular movements to enhance governmental transparency and to investigate and to prosecute official corruption. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Hazare. Dr. Sima Samar. Dr. Samar is an internationally celebrated advocate for human and women's rights. She has worked to raise global awareness about the detrimental impact of corruption on the promotion and protection of Afghan human and women's rights. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Samar. And Global Witness. Based in London and in Washington, D.C., Global Witness has initiated trailblazing campaigns against natural resource-related conflict and corruption and associated environmental and human rights abuses. Karina Gilfillan, Director of Global Witness's U.S. office, is here tonight on behalf of the organization. We are incredibly honored to be able to recognize the work of these community leaders in the fight against corruption and in the protection of human rights. It's an honor to have each of you here, and we look forward to learning more about you and your work in the course of this evening's presentation. But first, I'd like to introduce the person who's made this evening possible, Mr. Peter A. Allard, QC. Peter graduated from UBC with a BA in History in 1968 and an LLB in 1971. After graduation, Peter practiced law and participated in various business enterprises. With a keen legal mind and a passionate commitment to creating positive change, Peter also assumed leadership roles in human rights, environmental advocacy, and other philanthropic work. Peter, thank you so much for your passion for human rights, your visionary leadership in the pursuit of justice, and for your support of this very important project. Peter's commitment led to the establishment of the Allard Prize for International Integrity, which is one of the largest awards in the world, recognizing efforts to combat corruption and to promote human rights. As Peter makes his way to the podium, please join me in recognizing him for his significant contribution.
Esteemed honorees and distinguished guests, this day is not about me, but rather the finalists in this inaugural year of the Allard Prize, who have endured and prevailed in their fight for transparency, accountability, the rule of law, and basic human rights. These fights are real, despite mostly being invisible to those of us who live and work comfortably. Today is about recognizing heroes in these fights and telling their stories in the hope that doing so will inspire change, not just in our systems, but in each of us personally. Once the construction of the Army Hut classrooms was completed here at UBC, just after the end of the Second World War, the generation of UBC law students who preceded me came forward with a new sense of hope and commitment to build a better and more just world. Tens of millions of the world's citizens had just died horrific deaths through the most cruel atrocities and traumas imaginable. Political regimes preceding World War II, both on the extreme left and right, clearly demonstrated that despite their constitutions and manifestos to the contrary, the realities of their political administrations stripped citizens of their basic democratic rights of fairness and justice through denial of an equitable rule of law. Tyranny reigned. After the war, with the assistance of a number of initiatives, including the Marshall Plan and creation of the United Nations, democracy in North America and Europe began to encounter an era of peace and stability. Every form of government is a constant work in progress, demanding full transparency, accountability, and value for those citizens who work and deliver revenue to the system. The goal is to ensure that those less fortunate are raised up to a minimum level, that checks and balances over power and abuse of power actually work, and that our democratic values and principles are rooted to the middle ground where a strong sense of right and wrong, social justice and truth are in place and stabilized. We often naively think that the issues of accountability, corruption, and the lack of the rule of law are second and third world issues. But the reality is that our Western democracies are subject to precisely the same concerns. Over the past 30 years, the necessary checks and balances have been increasingly eroded through deregulation and the influence of money over substance and democratic principles. Stability and the rule of law have, to a significant extent, given way to unfettered power in the hands of a few and an overtaxed and increasingly vulnerable middle class. Personal self-interest and short-term greed are threatening legal systems around the world, and long-term protections are disappearing. Much of this degradation has been accomplished with or sanctioned by the concurrence of our legal and judicial brethren. Furthermore, there has been a loss of judicial independence over time, and judges themselves, some of whom come to their positions through elaborate political networking systems, are themselves subject to the temptations of their own and their associates' interests. In order to protect each and every democratic principle that we hold dear, it's imperative that we foster more independent, probative, balanced, and impartial justice systems worldwide. We must protect and fight for the basic rights that some people have today and for which others yearn. For history has warned us that they are fragile and they can disappear overnight. What better place to highlight the need to strengthen the concept of the rule of law, ethics, and international integrity within the legal profession and the broader community than at UBC Law? And how better to support this activism than to focus attention on those guiding lights in the world who tirelessly and selflessly fight, often at great personal risk, on behalf of those who are denied equal access to a just and fair legal system. The carefully considered Allard Prize criteria are all critical and essential criteria that must be weighed individually before choosing the prize winner. Anti-corruption and human rights are not themselves the focus of the prize. Rather, the prize honors those precious and inspirational souls whose work and action embody all of the prize criteria, including leadership, courage, transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. The prize creates its own integrity by properly weighing the criteria and must never give way to political expedience, networking influence, or a concern about how UBC law might look on the international stage in the choice of recipients or honorees. The prize committee balanced 50-50 from academia and the private sector itself engenders internal integrity. Each of this year's finalists, Global Witness, Anna Hazare, and Sima Samar, embody all of the prize criteria. It was an extremely difficult task for the prize committee to select one prize winner from amongst the three. All are extraordinary and all are deserving, and we hold all of them in the highest esteem. I would like to thank all of those who have made this prize possible. Many people have dedicated their time, and in many cases their free time, to help develop the prize and its many components in its inaugural year. From the creation of the prize criteria and the establishment of the nomination and selection process by the prize committee, to the submission by nominators of more than 150 nominations from 48 countries, to the review and consideration of the nominations by the prize committee, to the input from the advisory board on the nominee shortlist, to the young designers from New Zealand who created the awards that will be presented this evening and which capture the meaning and significance of the prize so beautifully and effectively, to the international art community who contributed photographs that reflect the prize criteria, to Max Fisher for her work and creativity with respect to the award design and photo competitions, to the public relations, website development, and translation professionals who have assisted us in this endeavor, and to Across Borders Media, the videographers who have helped us to tell the compelling stories of our finalists, as you will soon see. To my lawyer, Jeff Lister, and his firm, Fasken Martineau, for their active and ongoing participation in the development of the prize. And not least of all, to the Faculty of Law at Allard Hall. Lainey Shore, the Allard Prize Manager, Simi Puri, the Faculty of Communications Manager, Students Assistants Michelle Reinhardt and Sam Turcott, and especially Dean Marianne Bobinski and Assistant Dean External Relations Carrie Srulowski for not only sharing my vision for the prize and for the prize and the faculty, but by making a tremendous personal and organizational commitment to achieving its realization. To all of those and many more, my heartfelt thanks. To a large extent, this prize is meant to honor the generation that preceded me, along with their ideals and hopes for a just and better life, and who had hopes and dreams for their family and their families' families, for a safer and more secure society. It is now time for us to encourage the next generation to be actively engaged and vigilant, and disparate groups to come together to effect positive change and find common sense solutions to the constant threats to basic human rights and security. I challenge all of us to become participants in the quest to improve all of the systems that we were responsible for managing, not just in Canada, but worldwide. And I challenge all of us to spend less time on pure commentary and more time on incorporating our collective intellects into progressive and equitable solutions and actions. My objective is for all students passing through the halls of UBC Law, and indeed law students around the world, to honor the memories of our legal brethren who have stood up for transparency, accountability, and the rule of law by listening to and being inspired by the stories of those who are chosen as prize recipients and honorees, and to steadfastly work to instill the prize criteria in their own day-to-day actions and dealings with others in the legal community and elsewhere, and thereby help to rebalance the system. This evening, we are honoring 3 exceptional individuals and organizations who epitomize the ideals of the Allard Prize. Let us all be inspired by their stories and be active agents of positive change in our own communities of influence each and every day. Thank you. Did I go back now?
Thanks so much, Peter, for those remarks and for your vision in establishing this prize. We've talked about the role of stories and of inspiration, and there could be no more natural way to turn to introducing our keynote speaker this evening. I have the opportunity to introduce someone who exemplifies the values of the Allard Prize, values that include extraordinary courage and leadership in opposing corruption. It's my honor to welcome Mr. Stephen Lewis. Stephen Lewis is a distinguished visiting professor at Ryerson University in Toronto. He's the board chair of the Stephen Lewis Foundation, which is dedicated to turning the tide on HIV/AIDS in Africa. And he's the co-founder and co-director of AIDS-Free World, an international advocacy organization. Stephen is a senior fellow of the Enough Project. He's an immediate past member of the board of directors of the Clinton Health Access Initiative and emeritus board member of the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. He served as commissioner of the Global Commission on HIV and the Law. And the Commission's landmark report, as you may know, was issued in July 2012. Stephen Lewis's work with the United Nations spanned more than 2 decades. He was UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for HIV/AIDS in Africa from June 2001 to the end of 2006. From 1995 to 1999, Stephen was Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF at the organization's global headquarters in New York. From 1984 to 1988, he was Canada's ambassador to the United Nations. From 1970 to 1978, Stephen was leader of the Ontario New Democratic Party, during which time he became leader of the official opposition. He's an author of the best-selling book, Race Against Time. He holds 36 honorary degrees from Canadian universities, as well as honorary degrees from Dartmouth College and Johns Hopkins University. In 2003, Stephen Lewis was appointed as a companion in the Order of Canada, Canada's highest honor for lifetime achievement. And in 2012, Mr. Lewis was an inaugural recipient of Canada's Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Stephen Lewis.
You'll notice, I hope, that Peter Allard walked solemnly and cautiously to the podium using the steps, whereas I leaped gracefully from the presence onto the stage. I felt that the only way I could compete with Peter was to show my athletic prowess. I am enormously delighted and privileged to be here and thank the Dean immensely for so gracious an introduction. I sometimes feel as though my life is entirely in the past tense. I must say that it's a privilege beyond this extraordinary ceremony to have been at UBC Law today. I had the most fascinating exchange with students over the lunch hour, and you are grooming in this law school a group of incipient enthusiasts who indeed strive for social justice and want to change the world. And in the heart of a democratic socialist, which occasionally beats with infirmity, it was great to hear. This is an extraordinary evening, Peter Allard. This is a remarkable contribution to not just international integrity, but to international awareness. And these 3 global champions, as they were called, represent all that is best in humankind in the struggle for a decent and compassionate international community. And I feel really privileged to be here to attest to their strengths and what they do. I can say, if I may be allowed a momentary digression, that you can't imagine how pleased I am to be in my own country speaking. I have spent an unfortunate length of time latterly speaking to American audiences, which is almost more than my soul can contend with. And I have but one aspect of speaking in the United States which appeals to me enormously. I'm almost always introduced as Ambassador Lewis. Well, I like that. It happens not often enough. And I feel almost mournful to have to say to American audiences that in Canada, when you finish your diplomatic tenure, you lose your title and you revert to mortal obscurity again. It's only in the United States, where once a senator, always a senator, once a governor, always a governor, once a president, always a president. The entire society is sustained by titular self-aggrandizement. And I look upon it with a kind of affectionate bemusement. I was trying to think of how I might cast these remarks in a way which would be consistent with the extraordinary grace and depth of the evening. And I thought that I might, if I may, elaborate a little on the themes which emerge from these three astonishing contenders. First, if I may, global witness. And I'm really overwhelmed when I read the material associated with Global Witness, because it is an organization made up of the most profoundly dedicated people determined to deal with the absence of transparency and accountability in the international community around the corruption of the human condition. And there's a very great awareness in Global Witness of the international financial arrangements which so compromise the lives that people lead. One requires someone to offer a bribe, and one requires someone to accept a bribe, and the constituent ingredients thereby involved often make life miserable for vast numbers of people. And the international financial system, as everyone knows, has been an unlovely collaborator in that. But as was said from this podium, there's a tendency to think that the developing world is the world in which these inauspicious events occur. And that, of course, is not the case. In Canada, we have the Charbonneau Commission in Quebec, and we've had the SNC-Lavalin questions of integrity and corruption. And in the United States, my God, the activities of Halliburton in Iraq constitute a possible portfolio of corrupt international behavior, which some have estimated up to the amount of possibly $60 billion. And the Bipartisan Commission on Wartime Contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan came to the conclusion that the corruption by defense contractors could exceed that amount significantly. And then there's the organization Transparency International, which has done a study recently of defense and security programs, indicating that in 82 countries, involving well over 100 contractors, some 70% had high or critical vulnerability on the scale of corruption, and even more, some 85% had no adequate oversight whatsoever. And what I love about Global Witness, if I can be so direct, is the way in which they deal in so many sectors with such authenticity and principle. They deal in the sectors of the extractive industries. I think what's happening now to oil in the Niger Delta, and the terrible toll it has taken on the citizens of that region while the oil companies have enriched themselves beyond the dreams of avarice. Those are areas in which Global Witness is deeply engaged. I think of the work that they did on blood diamonds, dealing with countries like Liberia, where diamonds and the diamond trade were driving the most horrific internal civil wars. Even to this day, Liberia, alas, stands right at the bottom of Transparency International's list of predatory, corrupt countries. And that is painful, because Liberia has probably the best president on the continent, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, only one of two African presidents who are women. And it is deeply agonizing to think that a country that has struggled through such an onslaught of fratricide internally is now dealing with so much corruption externally. I remember how many times I visited the copper belt in Zambia when I was dealing with HIV and AIDS in that country. And I was astounded at the microscopic percentage of the revenues that were going to royalties for the country and how much was being siphoned off for the international mining companies. And I don't know a mining company almost anywhere in the Democratic Republic of the Congo that could be said to be dealing in decent ways with the citizenry. And that's a country which has been beset with internal violence since 1994, largely focused on the extraction of minerals, leading to the most terrible toll on human beings, some 4 to 5 million people in the intervening years, not to mention 500,000 rapes, so that it becomes a kind of femicide in a country where women are more endangered almost than any place in the world, except perhaps Afghanistan. And I think of the way in which diamonds are now playing a role in the enrichment of the president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, a certifiable lunatic who has spent his entire tenure killing people and orchestrating the raping of women solely and exclusively because they support the opposition party. So that when you get an organization like Global Witness, which is determined to deal with all of these major sectors and determined to bring to the world's attention what it is that compromises the lives people lead, because you cannot at the celestial levels of leadership engage in corruption without it filtering down and undermining the way in which people have food and clothing and school fees and shelter and all of the ingredients which make life worth living. And it has a very unsettling way in which it suffuses a society. I remember my astonishment when funds that came from the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, destined for Uganda, were siphoned off by the Minister of Health. The Minister of Health is now in jail. But nonetheless, it is profoundly disconcerting to think that in a case of dealing with such human tragedy, people would be willing, as a result of the cultural community, that they would be prepared to do such damage to dollars which are destined for saving human lives. And it does become a cultural phenomenon induced, I have to say, by Western colonialism and all of the things we did to those countries and all of the ways in which we masqueraded our voracious appetites with corrupt intent. The one country, I suppose, in Africa, the continent with which I'm most familiar, which is least corrupt according to all of the indices, is probably Rwanda, which is an astonishing achievement post-genocide. On the other hand, Rwanda has become an authoritarian state, and it's very difficult to make the judgments of how you rationalize these things. I suppose what I want to say is that it would be a mistake to think that the grassroots, the citizens at the communities, are given to the kind of absence of accountability and absence of transparency and Pavlovian corruption to which the leadership is so often given. And if there are in place organizations like Global Witness which keep track of what is happening, bring it to the attention of the world, persuade the G8, as they have done, to watch carefully the money laundering which occurs in various international countries, then gradually you can liberate the entire society. And liberation of that entire society leads me logically to Anna Hazare, who I gather is Anna Hazare. I like the full name rather than merely Anna. Aniji is a lovely name. And Mr. Hazare has led an anti-corruption movement in India which has captivated the country. How do you do that? How do you captivate an entire country of 1 billion people? I mean, it's just absolutely remarkable. And there have been these intense marches in support of his determination to have accountability and transparency in the country in all of the transactions which occur. And some of the transactions have been soul-destroying. The way in which money that was destined for tens of millions of farmers somehow never reached them. The way in which Dr. Hazare is able to say that only 10% of the money which was destined to support development actually reached the people for whom it was intended. That's heartbreaking, because the way in which one emancipates societies in this world today is through a combination of economic development on the one hand and dealing with the whole social panorama of health, education, welfare, nutrition, agriculture on the other. And what Dr. Hazare has done is to bring to the attention of the people of India a movement akin to the Gandhian movement, which so energized an entire society and made them realize what was important. And his goal is accountability. And he's gone on hunger strikes to believe it, to make it clear. And he has, in addition to that, forced the parliaments of India to incorporate legislation which alters the nature of corrupt transactions and makes them transparent. I mean, you know, individuals lead movements. I'm always astonished at how that happens. But in this case, it has happened. And it is, in fact, a social transformation. I was in Bihar state in India not very long ago. It's the poorest state in the country. I was there with someone whose name you will know. I was there with Gloria Steinem. And we were looking at sexual trafficking amongst young girls in Bihar. And the stories one hears of the manipulative corruption at the top, which so diminishes the lives of those in the lower levels of society, is dreadful, staggering. This is the poorest state in a country which is impoverished in many respects, and it induces a kind of rage that this should be allowed, because the international community understands what is going on. As I enter my dotage, as I'm in my geriatric period, I keep on saying to myself and wanting to communicate to the world, none of this stuff happens by accident. Everybody knows it's happening. The international drive for the elimination of poverty by the year 2030, which is now even a World Bank goal. Everybody knows that you have to remove this incessant manipulation of international funding in order to give human beings on the planet the rights to which they're entitled. You talk about human rights, the rights to survival is a human right. The right to food, clothing, and shelter is a human right ingrained in every international covenant and convention. Why is it that we spend so much time on fighting wars and funding wars, and we never have the finances available to do the job at the community level, which will make such a profound change in the world? And that brings me, of course, to Dr. Sima Samar, of whom I am in awe. She is the sublime Afghan woman's advocate and activist who believes so intensely in education as the vehicle which will transform a society. And in the process of believing in education, she has built 100 or had built 115 schools and an institute for higher education. Again, that's part of the international struggle. The Convention on the Rights of the Child and one of the Millennium Development Goals, they all talk about putting kids in primary school and making a considerable effort to get every young girl who is eligible into primary school, but very little attention is paid to secondary school, particularly for girls. And almost no attention is paid to higher education for girls and young women. And the consequence internationally is to create an entirely oppressed class based on gender. It's abominable. It's repugnant. It's unconscionable. It happens in country after country. And yet in this country of Afghanistan, dealing with the Taliban, dealing with extraordinary internal upheaval year after year, it's so fascinating that Dr. Sima Samar has managed to create a space within which education is given primacy and women's rights are given primacy. And as you will see in the film, and as you can read about her, it isn't merely education, but it's the whole panoply of women's rights. When I was reading what you had said and listening to what you had said, Dr. Samar, I thought to myself of that whole international range of women's issues where women's rights or human rights seem so elusive. International sexual trafficking, female genital mutilation, child marriage, forced prostitution, an absence of economic autonomy, an absence of political representation, an absence of property rights, an absence of inheritance rights, and everywhere you see in the international landscape a kind of contagion of sexual violence which makes the blood run cold. I've always believed in my adult life, enormously influenced by my wife, who is as deep and inveterate a feminist as you will find. I've always believed in the struggle for gender equality. But in the last 20 or 25 years of having the privilege of working internationally, I've really come to the conclusion, pretty obvious conclusion, that the struggle for gender equality is the single most important struggle on the planet. You cannot continue to marginalize over 50% of the world's population and ever expect to approximate equality or social justice. It just won't happen. And what Dr. Sima Samar is doing is exactly that struggle for gender equality. There's nothing more admirable. I spend, as I told the students today, and I must bring these remarks to an end, a great deal of my time these days, if I may be personal for a moment, dealing with sexual violence, whether it's in Zimbabwe or the Congo or Liberia or Sierra Leone or South Africa or many other countries, desperately trying to find ways to prevent the violence before it occurs, because so much of the money that's going internationally goes to healing the women after they've been raped. And it's an incredible battle. And it happens everywhere. It's not just the sexual violence in conflict countries. It's politically orchestrated sexual violence. It's gang rape. It's intimate partner rape, it's marital rape, it's Steubenville in the United States, it's the American military, it's the idiotic chants, self-immolating chants of students at St. Mary's and some students at UBC. It's the dreadful things that happen all around the world to women. This is the great and historic struggle. This is what makes the rule of law real, when women's rights or human rights become central to the way in which the international community behaves. So what more can be said about these three champions? They all mirror what the world is now inching towards. We've had the Millennium Development Goals, which were formulated in the year 2000 to be achieved by the year 2015. And now we have a number of organizations and some celestial aristocratic leaders who are shaping the goals for the next 15 years from 2015 to 2030. And what are they talking about? They're talking about financial accountability and corruption. They're talking about the environment, which deals directly with what our colleague from India is doing when he deals with land and environment and watersheds throughout India, and they're dealing with gender equality, understanding that that was the great abysmal failure of the first set of goals. So what you have in these three champions is exactly those issues on which the world is now focused. And I'll tell you what else you have in these three champions. You have people who are indefatigable. They will never give up. They'll fight to their last breath. They understand that if you're tenacious and uncompromising, and you never allow yourself to be intimidated or ground down, by God, one day the pendulum swings. And when it swings, we have a more decent, civilized, humane international community. Peter Allard, thank you for doing this astonishing thing you're doing. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you very much for those inspiring remarks. You've heard a little bit about our finalists, and you've heard about how their struggles fit within the global context. We now have an opportunity to learn about them in a different way. So if all goes well, the lights will dim, and you'll have an opportunity to see a video, like magic.
Being in Istanbul is inspiring. Here, nobody knows who I am. And beside the beauty of the city, in Turkey, as an Islamic country, the level of education, the level of civilization in this country, the separation of mosque and politics, and the freedom that the women are enjoying in this country, I really enjoy the freedom. This is not the case in Kabul. It's always male-dominated. It's always discriminatory against women. So I began when I was very young to fight for equality. And now it's turned to be my habit. Some of the people keep saying that you are only fighting for women's rights, but I keep saying that, yes, women are human beings. So I'm fighting for human rights, not only for women's rights. And I believe that education is the main tool to empower the people to be able to protect their rights. So I came for a conference to speak a little bit about girls' education in Afghanistan.
It's very well you're here. Thank you.
Dr. Samar has the position of the chair of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. And a lot of people think that Afghanistan is a hopeless cause, that nobody's educated, it's a disaster, and many of us don't feel that.
Women's rights are human rights, and Dr. Samar believes without them, neither development is achieved, nor peace and stability maintained.
We should not only focus on primary education, because primary education can only give you the possibility to read and write. It doesn't give you the possibility to be in a position of power in order to change the policy and the strategy within the country. What we need to do...
Dr. Samar is definitely a hero. She is a tremendous role model. One just looks at Nasima, who works at her school.
She's such a big inspiration in my life. I love her very much. Dr. Samar is the founder of Gaurshad Institute of Higher Education, which is a newly established institute. Education for women is not very accepted among the Afghan people. So we wanted to get more women to Gaurshad Institute to have a higher education and to be able to get jobs.
Dr. Samar is training girls to university level, and they're girls from large families. Often it's one-parent family. They have no money, and these girls want to go to school. They know that Afghanistan can be a better place.
I keep telling the young girls and boys that our existence doesn't mean much if we cannot really bring positive change. But we are working against the conservative mentality and a different kind of violation of human rights. They burn the wife, they kill the wife. On girls, it's forced marriages, child marriages, forced prostitution sometimes. And they don't have anything to do. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go.
So I think she's going to have a tremendous challenge carrying on, but she will. She will. But she lives in danger every day. She has 4 bodyguards, an armored car. But she says one day there will be peace. She loves her country. She keeps going because she wants to be ready when that day is there.
The job in Afghanistan is not done. We should not have the rule of gun. We should have the rule of law, and every citizen who lives in Afghanistan should have the equal rights. That's one of the reasons that I keep going. So I still call for justice, I still call for accountability, I still call for acknowledgement of the suffering of people. And I will not stop as long as I can.
Corruption is something that people sometimes think is happening somewhere over there in a country that they know perhaps very little about. But in fact, major corruption, which is affecting many millions of people every day, is actually facilitated right here in our very own backyard by our whole global financial system and the lack of accountability and the problem of anonymous shell companies and the failure of our governments to really tackle this issue.
And the big problem is that some of the poorest people in the world are not benefiting from the natural resources they own. So it's really important to know where the money goes from those resources. And if it's going into the pockets of corrupt officials and into the pockets of companies who were in collusion with those officials, then that's absolutely wrong.
So a whole load of Global Witnesses campaigns look at the role of natural resources in funding conflict and corruption.
So from that really has developed a lot of our methodology, which is about in-depth investigations, building up irrefutable evidence.
Oh really? They know where the money's gone.
And then really working to create very specific change to have an impact.
We use a range of different ways of gathering information. Some of it is carrying in video cameras, recording devices when we go into a country like Cambodia or Laos. But we also work with local researchers and people on the ground. We maintain very regular communication with some of the communities which have been impacted by these large-scale land investments.
It's a great team here. It feels like you're juggling. Every day you've got a different ball in your hand and you're trying to keep them all in the air to keep things going and to keep pushing things forwards.
Yeah, which is why I'm asking you for guesstimates of these numbers so we can see, do I stand any chance of getting this or...
Corrupt dictators who steal their country's money often want to get it to the West, using banks and wire transfers and companies to hide who that money belongs to. What we're actually talking about is one of the mechanisms that keeps poor countries and poor people poor.
If there's anything happening in terms of intimidations, I've seen people with no economic power who can't pay a lawyer, who even have no idea about their own rights and are helpless against the power of politicians, of politics, against the power of logging companies, economic power, power of influence.
For example, it might be as much as $10 is lost from Africa in illicit financial flows for every dollar that goes in aid.
So we're about trying to make governments do the right thing and business do the right thing.
Sometimes it's focusing on looking at the national laws and making sure that the government is following its own laws. But in other cases, we look at the role of the company itself and whether or not there can be influence brought on the company through its investors, for example.
And making companies responsible for their supply chains, checking their supply chains, making supply chains more transparent, publishing what they're doing and really holding companies publicly to account.
For example, we alerted the world to the problem of blood diamonds. And there is law now in America and in Europe that covers the value of 2/3 of the oil and gas and mining companies worldwide. We're changing how people think about an issue.
And if we can make it harder for corrupt dictators to move their money around the world, then we make it harder for terrorists and arms smugglers to move their money around the world too.
Change is long term, it won't happen overnight. And some people say corruption, it's just so complicated, it's there, we can't do anything about it. So does that mean we just look the other way? I think not.
I've always been an activist, and this kind of work is work that I can't ignore and I can't step away from.
Getting up out of bed each morning in order to do something that's actually going to change the world.
When I started with Global Witness, I had nice curly brown hair, and now it's grey and straight.
But regardless of how difficult or scary it can be, I will keep going and I'll keep fighting the fight.
It's like creating a whole movement. It's like the anti-corruption movement. We're after getting the bad guys.
Mahatma Gandhi said, if you want to change the country, you need to change and develop the villages first. In 1975, in our village, Ralegan Siddhi, I started creating a rural development plan and came across rampant government corruption. I realized that we cannot have sustainable development until we stop corruption. I'm not afraid of life or death. And I realized that once you're no longer afraid, changes are easy and nothing is impossible. The common people have so many problems in India due to corruption. Development has come to a complete stop. Life for the everyday man has become so difficult. Not even 10% of the government funding that's meant for them ends up getting to them. So in 1990, I started the fight.
Anna ji pursued for a Lokpal Act. Lokpal Act is an act for curtailing the corruption in the country. And due to his consistent fight since last 20 years, people have got faith in Anna ji. He is the only person in the country who is fighting against corruption. Anna ji's goals are transparency in government and accountability to common people. All countrymen gave support by coming on roads, making rallies, candlelight marches. So government formed one committee for making this act, studying this act.
People are fed up of because of the corruption. So they are now joined Annaji's movement. Anna Hazare has devoted totally for the goodness of the society.
अभी हम देखते हैं ना, इलेक्शन आता है तो 2-2 घंटा भाषण.
Anna Hazare believed in a total development of the human being. That's why he is the most important person in India.
They say we haven't seen Mahatma Gandhi, but we can see another Gandhi here. So people from all over the world, from all over the country, come here just to see Annaji. And that's the people, they get inspiration from him. They go to the village, they see all the development work which he has done.
Today, the environment is a big concern for everybody. It has global implications. In the villages, rainwater flows to the dams and causes soil erosion, which affects the agricultural sector. So to stop soil erosion and promote water conservation in our village, we created a watershed training center in Raleigh City. As a result of this program, we saw many positive changes come about. People started getting more work and earning more money. Also, the migration from villages to cities has been significantly reduced.
Watershed development like tree plantation, forest development, and the schools here. There is a school for failed children. That's a very new concept. The child is given priority, and the result here comes out of 100.
Proper education is given to the children, it will definitely prevent the corruption in the human life as well as the country.
Youth are the future of our nation. From the very beginning, I've been working with young people. With their help, the anti-corruption movement has awakened all of India. I've been jailed many times by opposing politicians. There have been death threats made against me. People hired contract killers, but these killers said, "We don't want to kill Anna Hazare." Today there is less corruption. People think I cannot stop it, but I trust that we surely can.
And a day will come, a total corruption will be removed from the human life of Indian people. I am very sure about that.
I fight corruption for the common people. If they get hurt, I get hurt. Social transformation is not easy. It's difficult, but not impossible. And so the fight goes on. I just keep on going until my last breath.
What amazing stories to be able to share together tonight. The video that you've just seen will soon be posted on the Allard Prize website and made available around the world. And it's actually part of a larger project. The idea is to have a prize that resonates beyond this moment, beyond this room and this ceremony, but to create some place where there can be a focus on the stories of amazing people who make courageous sacrifices in order to promote the rule of law, to fight corruption, and to protect human rights. So I'm delighted to be able to share that film with you this evening and to work together towards that larger project. It's my great privilege I say, now with a greater awareness of everyone in the room as well, to have Anna Hazare, Dr. Sima Samar, and Karina Gilfillan from Global Witness here tonight. We're so delighted to recognize the amazing work that you have done. And for everyone else, we're very, very close to getting to the exciting moment of actually announcing this year's Allard Prize winner. Before we do so, I just have to mention again that the actual prize that you'll see this evening is itself the result of an international competition. There's a design competition initiated by the Allard Prize Committee, and the winners were Greg Saul and Tiago Rourke with Diatom Studio, and they designed the actual art piece that serves as the prize that you'll see here tonight. But with that put to one side, I want to invite Peter to step forward and to help me give out this year's award, which I haven't practiced, so let's see how this works. Yes, there's something under there. All right, are you ready?
No. I don't know how we choose.
It is very hard. On behalf of UBC Law, the Allard Prize Committee, and the Advisory Board, I have the great privilege of announcing the recipient of the inaugural Allard Prize for International Integrity, Anna Hazare. We've asked Mr. Hazare to say a few words. So we've invited Mr. Hazare to say a few words with the assistance of his translator, Pradeep Munoz, who will step forward. Namaste.
This is from Anna Hazare. Dear sisters and brothers, Mr. Peter Allard is one who has dedicated his mind, body and soul towards service to the society, and I am very happy to receive this recognition. I have been combating corruption for the last 25 years. I have always followed and practiced non-violent methods of satyagraha, that is, protests through agitations, demonstrations, hunger strikes, etc. I have never allowed any violence to take place. On August 16, 2011, when I went on a hunger strike at Ramlila Maidan, New Delhi, people turned up in very large numbers, not only in New Delhi, but also all across the nation. Millions of people came forward onto the streets to pledge their support. But not a single stone was thrown. This has become a unique example for the rest of the world. I have also been imprisoned by the government quite a few times, especially during agitations. I also tried to fight the legal battles through the judiciary. Some of the deposed ministers filed various legal suits against me at various places. 11 advocates came forward and offered me their voluntary legal services. Some are still fighting cases on my behalf without charging any money. Due to the persistent anti-corruption activity 6 cabinet ministers had to resign from their posts, and more than 400 corrupt government officers have been dismissed. Due to these agitations, the government was forced to bring about transparency in their operations. The government amended and framed newer laws. Similarly, agitations for improvement in government functioning led to introduction of biometric attendance systems in government offices. A new legislature came into existence by virtue of which no document could remain without action for more than 7 days. The Right to Information Act came into existence. Earlier, information on various facts was denied to the public under the pretext of the Official Secrets Act. After gaining access to the vital information, the RTI Act has led to the unearthing of a large number of scams and some really big ones. Earlier, there were several malpractices for the transfers of the government officers. Now, due to the new legislature, no government officer can be transferred before completion of his 3-year term, nor can he retain the post for more than 3 years. A village community meeting is, in fact, a village parliament. A new legislature came into existence, empowering the village community with more powers. The cooperative institutions were plagued with rampant corruption. A completely new legislature was framed to counter the corruption. There are several cooperative credit societies, and these are mostly controlled by powerful politicians. The controllers would siphon out almost all the money and later declare the society bankrupt. Many poor depositors lost their wealth, deposits, their lifetime savings, earnings. Our agitations forced the government to declare a 2,000 million rupees relief package for poor aggrieved depositors. For the last 2 years, I have mainly focused my efforts for a very strong Jana Lokpal Act, that is Ombudsman Act. I have already given a notice to the government to go on hunger strike on this issue when the next winter session of Parliament begins. I have dedicated my life in the service of the people. I believe service to humanity is, in real sense, the worship of God. I have been doing my bit and continue to do so within the limits of my abilities. I am thankful to the Prize Committee to consider me worthy of this honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Hazare, for being here this evening and for allowing us the honor of recognizing your work. And thank you to Pradeep Munoth for the help with the translation of your speech. Tonight we've actually heard 3 inspiring and uplifting stories. And I think at various points in time I heard murmurs through the crowd. How could you pick? How do you choose between people and organizations that have shown such courage and dedication to helping others around them? And as Peter mentioned in his remarks, it was an extremely difficult task for the prize committee to select one prize winner from among this amazing group of dedicated, inspiring individuals and organizations. I'm therefore delighted to make a special announcement this evening that Dr. Samar and Global Witness will each be recognized with honorable mention awards and a $25,000 prize. So please come forward. Before we conclude this evening's formal celebrations, I have to once again thank various individuals and groups. First, of course, Mr. Peter Allard, members of the Allard Prize Committee and the Advisory Board, Mr. Stephen Lewis for being a part of this inaugural celebration and to adding your inspiring words to our evening. Lainey Shore, Allard Prize Program Manager, UBC Law students Michelle Reinhardt and Sam Turcott, who've been the Allard Prize coordinators. Simi Puri, UBC Law's Communications Manager, Carrie Strelaski, Assistant Dean, External Relations, and a special thank you to Anna Hazare, Dr. Sima Samar, and Karina Gilfillan with Global Witness for traveling all the way to Vancouver to be with us this evening. As I would like to thank you for taking time to come here and be a part of this event, which we hope, as we said, is not just an event that happens here that recognizes amazing stories, but creates a springboard for carrying these inspiring stories around the world in ways that can help generate further change and to address the great human needs that we all saw in the video together this evening. Thank you very much. So also, it's my delight to let you know that there are refreshments right outside these doors and that we invite you to join us and celebrating this occasion and in talking with each other about what we've heard tonight directly outside these doors. And unfortunately, that doesn't apply to anybody who was on the prize committee or who's a winner, because we need to take your pictures right around this corner. So if you come down while everybody else enjoys their refreshments, that would be great. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.